So today, thank you, Mohammed. Today, we're going to jump straight into what we're covering today, and then we'll leave questions till the end because, again, we don't have a lot of time together today. Typically, Mondays and Tuesdays, we have very short classes, and then Wednesday through Friday, we're together for longer. So, anyway, today we're going to be talking about the software development life cycle. You're probably familiar with this. You've probably heard this before, and if you haven't, well, now you've heard it and you'll be hearing it a lot in the course of your career, right? And just like the name says, it is the life cycle of building a software solution or implementing a software solution, right? So if a company wanted to implement Salesforce, right, the point that they hired you was not when they started thinking about it, okay? There's some planning, there's some visioning that has gone into it, right? And then at whatever point it is you're joining the organization, you most likely will then see the rest of the journey. Now, there is no fixed point in which a BA is hired. They may hire you before the beginning of the project to help them with the visioning. They may hire you at the beginning of the project. They may hire you at the end of the project, right? If they hire you in the middle of a project, it might be that a BA left and now they're hiring you as a replacement. They may hire you at the end of the project because they need a BA for operations. So I believe it was last class when, and I think it was Mobola who was talking about, and maybe it wasn't you, Mobola, but I know someone asked a question that got me into talking about differentiating in between a BA hired for a project and a BA hired just for business continuity. When you're, and I'm going to deviate a bit here to give you context, right? When you're applying to jobs, try to understand what type of job you're applying to. The fact that it says BA is not enough. Like, in what context are they hiring you? Now, in both instances, you're still going to work as a BA, but for example, I have a preference for working on projects, right? I don't, when I see roles where they're looking for a BA for day-to-day grind, it doesn't excite me and I don't apply. It may be different for you because you're trying to build your expertise, you're trying to, build a name, get known in the industry, right? But I'm saying that just to say that every time you see a BA role, they're usually hiring for a project or they're hiring for, we don't particularly have a project going on, but we do have Salesforce application, right? And there's some work that needs to be done from time to time. The marketing manager needs this, that person needs that, right? And the BA will continue working with the business. Usually those are employee roles, usually maybe term, but it will be an employee role, okay? I like to work as a contractor, right? I like to have a start date and an end date. And we can go into conversations about that later. If you want to ask me, so Abiola, why do you like that? Don't you like the stability that an employee role would give you? But we'll have a separate conversation, right? So let's bring that back to software development lifecycle. Depending on why you're hired and where in the lifetime of the project you're hired, right? It's very important for you to understand the entire life cycle because I couldn't tell you right now at what point you're going to get hired. In the job description, they may not even include it. In some job descriptions, they would indicate something like, oh, it's a lead requirement gathering. So, okay, they're still in the early stages, right? But sometimes it's not so clear. So I say all of that just to say it's important for you to understand the entire life cycle because you don't know where you're going to fall when they hire you. So today we're going to talk about the software development cycle, also known as SDLC. Today we're going to talk about the stages, the methodologies involved, and your role as a BA when you get hired. Okay, so I hope that context would help you better understand what I'll be talking about today. So what is SDLC or software development lifecycle? Okay, it's basically structured phases in the lifetime of a project. So we're going to talk about it in the context of a project here because it's more applicable to a project environment. Okay, so again, when you think about life cycle, when you say the life cycle of a thing, you mean the end to end, the beginning to the end of that thing, right? So the life cycle of the project from initiation to post implementation. Okay, so typically in software development life cycle, we have the analysis stage, then we design, then we develop what it is we're building, may include some coding, integration, and all of that. So we develop the solution, we test the solution, right? All these things I'm mentioning, I'm not by any means saying that you, the BA, will do it. I'm talking about the life cycle. The life cycle is bigger than the PM or the BA. Everybody on the project team is involved in the life cycle. So we'll get to what you need to be more concerned about as a BA in a bit. Right now, I'm just talking about the entire life cycle. So we have the analysis, we have the design, development, testing, right? So our development is we build that solution, we implement it, then we test it. Is it working the way we need it to work? Then we push it to production, because remember, we don't build in production, right? We build in alternate environments, and then when the code is tested, stable, we push it to production for the end user to use. And then after that, we begin to maintain it to make sure that it keeps working the way that we need it to work. Okay. And then you see that under this, I have some roles mentioned in there. And that's basically, and this image is off the internet, I didn't create it. It's really to give you an idea of, okay, at the analysis stage, you are the heavy lifters. At the design stage, you are the heavy lifters. At the development, you are the heavy lifters. You see that the analysis stage is where you have the BA mentioned. Best practice, there really isn't a huge expectation that a BA will be designing, developing, but I know that employers are asking for an arm and a leg these days, so you never know, right? They may even, sometimes they ask you to help with testing. It's okay. I've seen so many job descriptions where they're looking for the BA to be able to support testing. Definitely not lead it, but support the testing, right? And then we have the deployment and maintenance, as you can see on this screen. So let's talk about planning and analysis, right? Okay. So basically here, we're talking about identifying a sequence of tasks that needs to be completed, when it needs to be completed, who's going to be completed, what's it going to cost, what's the definition of success, right? So as a part of this project, requirement gathering is just one part of it, right? There's many other things that need to happen as a part of a project. You, as the BA, may focus on the requirement gathering, some of the stakeholder management, right? But there's somebody looking at the money. Okay, we started with 1 million. How much do we have left? That's usually the project manager, worried about money, worried about timeline, worried about, different factors that may impact the project. Okay. Basically, point two here, the project manager makes sure the project goals, objectives, scope, risk, and all these other things have been defined, right? We need to know. We need to know what the risks are. It needs to be documented so that we can check it from time to time to say, okay, is this risk materializing or not? Usually, they're not going to ask you, the BA, to go document everything we have in the second point here. But remember, the BA oftentimes, sometimes, right, it feels like the BA is an assistant project manager. Okay, so when I teach people BA, I tend to talk a lot about the project manager as well. Because in my experience as a senior BA, when the project manager hasn't been around, like they've had to go away for something, I've had to step in. So even though it is not my job, I know enough to be able to take care of business, right? So if you were ever in that situation, knowing these things will help you. Okay, so basically we need to know all these things that I mentioned in here: goals, objectives, scope, and all of that. It needs to be documented, right, and communicated to whoever needs to know. Everything about project information is on a need to know basis, right? And the project manager would be able to communicate to you who needs to know what. The project manager will do a lot of this communication. Any communication that is not around requirement gathering or making decisions about requirements, anything that doesn't deal with this is usually managed by the PM. That's a very, high-level statement I made. There may be exceptions, but generally it would be the PM. Anything project information related, right? Whereas the BA would focus on, requirement gathering. But whatever the PM knows, for the most part, the BA would know a lot of it as well. So that if the PM was away, business typically would go to the BA to request that information. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay. The BA obtains input from stakeholders. seeking to understand what do they actually need. Okay, we're going to implement this new system. What do you need in the new system? We're not going to ask them what are the pages that you need, because the business doesn't think in terms of pages. Maybe they've never even seen Salesforce, right? What we're going to ask them is, so based on your work today, what do you need to be able to do? How can the system support the work that you do? This new system we're building, how can it support the work that you do? So questions like that, right, is what the BA will be asking, and then they'll give the BA information, and the BA will then say, okay, so I understand that you need to be able to do ABC, right? Okay, so if we give you the ability to do ABC and you're able to do your work, so ABC is going to be like an ABC is going to be like maybe an actual task, right? I'm saying ABC because I'm not giving you the name of a task. And then be like, so if you do ABC in the system, right, what is the result you're trying to achieve? Like, why are you doing ABC? The reason you need to know that is that you need to know when you've done the ABC really well. Somebody says, I need food, and you give them food. Well, it may be bad food you gave them, right? They may be allergic to something in the food that you gave them. So when they say, oh, I need to be able to eat lunch, you don't run with, I need to be able to eat lunch. What does lunch mean? Do you have dietary restrictions? How well can your body digest food? Okay, so just think about that in IT context. So we need to be able to do this. Let me say this. Every time you as a BA, you're meeting with a business, the business oftentimes will tell you what they need to be able to do, not why they need to be able to do it. It's just the way that they think, because doing is what they do, right? They know so much about what they need to do that when they think about it, they just say, oh, this is what I need to be able to do. It's okay for them to tell you that. However, it is your job to then say, oh, I understand you need to be able to do this. Can you tell me why you need to be able to do it? Because when they tell you why they need to be able to do it, then when you and your team build what they want to be able to do, you can test it to see, will it give them the result that they actually need? You don't want them to be the ones to find out you built it wrong. If you built it wrong, and yeah, we built things wrong, right? You want to know you built it wrong. There's something called building a solution, and there's building the solution right. You don't just want to build a solution. You just don't want to serve them lunch. You want to serve them lunch that would actually be nutritious. Anyway, we'll get into requirement gathering later. So we go to design, right? And the design phase is where we create models of the application. Usually, this is not the BA, the architects, right? The solution architects, depending on the level of complexity here, the solution architects will do their magic and all. Then we go to development. Okay, this is where the developers are building, may work in conjunction with admin. If it's in a company where they expect the BA to do some config, all of that would happen here. And then we have the testing, right? The testing team will test. Are there any defects? Is it working as it should? Is there anything we need to fix? So there is a testing type we call user acceptance testing, but this is different from the testing that I have above, because the testing that I have above is where the project team is testing what has been built to see that it works the way that it should. Whereas user acceptance testing is when the BA works closely with the business for the business to play with the system and confirm that it's actually behaving the way that it should. So the testing I have above should happen before UAT. Okay, that testing above should happen before UAT. You don't want the business being the one finding all the defects, right? That's not to say business is not going to find defects, but if they find so many, they begin to lose confidence in the system that even if you end up fixing all the issues they found in the system, they're still not going to trust it. Okay, how will a BA be able to support user acceptance testing? It means that even you must have gone in, see what has been done, feel comfortable with it so you can project that confidence when you're showing it to the business, walking them through it. Sometimes I've seen UAT where the BA is actually not the one walking them through it. The BA would prepare a document like a user acceptance testing script or document, which the BA would share with the business, and that document would list step by step what the user needs to do to perform that activity. Because remember, that business user you're working with, they've never seen the system, right? So even though they understand the task they need to perform, you need to say, go to this page and click on this and click on that for them to see the actual result. Then we have the deployment. Now we've done user acceptance testing, the business is happy, we then deploy the code to production so that end users can begin to use it. And then we have maintenance, which is where we're maintaining the schedule, little fixes here and there, things break, the business talks to the BA, and the BA fixes it. So if we wanted to look at this again, we have planning, design, development, testing, deployment, and maintenance. That is the software development life cycle. So if you think about it, there is a logical sequence to it if you really look at it, Obviously, we build it, we develop it before we test it, right? The project team tests it, and then if we're going to have UAT, the business will test it as well. Then we push it to production, and then we continue to maintain it from there. Okay, so let's talk about in an agile environment, right? We've talked about agile before, but here's just a few more points to note about agile, right? If we're using the agile methodology in this software development life cycle, I hope these terminologies are at least a bit familiar to you because we've talked about them before. If we're following the agile methodology, we're constantly talking to the stakeholders or the end users, right? And we're getting better at it. In month one, when we start the project, everything may still be a bit off, the BA, getting used to the end users, just getting into that flow, and then it would get better, with time. Sometimes, newbies have said, oh, I just feel so anxious. Like, how do I even start? How do I even introduce myself to them in a way that they're going to like me? Da, da, da. You see, that way you feel, they feel that way to an extent too. You don't know, like, you don't know them. So now they're also trying to make a good first impression. Granted, you're the one who needs something from them, right? I understand that. But, what's most important here, this is my advice all the time. And I think I've said it before, it's good to be technical. If you're technical, fantastic. The business is not going to like you for being technical. Actually, if you're technical and you show it to them you're technical, they're less interested in talking to you. It is your people skill that will sell you. In your month one in the business, what do you really know about the business? It's not expected that you know that much about the business, right? But when you come in and just the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the confidence that you project, whether you're faking it or not at this point is irrelevant. Fake it if you have to fake it. If you've decided to be a BA, well, this is something you're going to need to, it's going to become a part of you. And even for those who are not faking it, that first time you're talking to people you've never met before, you're not going to feel as comfortable as you normally feel like if you were talking to your buddies, right? So anyway, that is that. So agile methodology, constant collaboration, right? Obviously, be respectful of their time. Don't meet with them if you don't need to meet with them. But that constant loop of communication, you need to keep it going. Don't let them forget about you. Don't be in their faces all the time, but don't let them forget about you totally. Okay? We go through what we call iterations. You talked about iterations before, right? Iterations is one of the ways in which we improve. We deliver the best version that we can deliver now, and then we give it to the business to get feedback, and we fix whatever needs to be fixed. Rather than spend 1 year trying to perfect it, the perfection comes through feedback. We get feedback, and once we keep fixing their feedback, or once we keep doing fixes based on their feedback, eventually we'll get a product they really like. But if we think we know the business that well, and we're all just seated in a room for 1 year, trying to figure it out, make a perfect solution, well, chances that we're going to get it wrong. Okay? At the start of each sprint, during the sprint planning meeting, we determine how much work we can do. We pull it from the sprint product backlog into the sprint backlog. Okay? And then the team would work all through that sprint. We have our daily scrum, which is our daily short meeting where everybody talks about what they did yesterday, what they're going to be doing today, and if they have any impediment. So why do organizations go agile? Because agile methodology is not the only way. There's waterfall. I do have a slide on waterfall, a few slides on waterfall that I'll show you shortly. Why many companies going agile? They're going agile because they're trying to move away from the inability to react to change. With agile, because we're working in 2-week cycles, right? If we need to make a change, we can quickly make a change for the next cycle. But if we're working with a methodology where there is a lot of heavy lifting, we finish all the requirements, spend 1 year gathering requirement before we now start building. By the time we start building in month 13, the requirements we gathered in month 3 may be relevant. And we will not even know for a long time, right? Because we're so neck deep into month 4, month 5, month 6 compared to Agile, right? Because the BA is constantly, the constant loop of collaboration and communication, right? If there's any change to the business process, they'll be like, oh, Abiola, I know that last month I told you we do XYZ, but there's a new rule that came out in our industry and we're stopping XYZ in the near future. I know you told me go live is October 2024, but by June 2024, our XYZ will now be ABC. That's fantastic that they told me. But why were they able to tell me? Because there's that constant loop of communication where I'm constantly trying to gather requirement from them. Okay, so companies didn't have an ability to react quickly to change, so Agile looked attractive. Lack of adaptability and flexibility, right? Some methodologies are not flexible. You like I said, you do a lot of heavy lifting up front and you just keep working. You're not even listening to anybody because you're not even meeting with anybody anymore. You and your team are just heads down working. Inability to see early results as well. So companies were pumping money into implementations, right? But they had to wait maybe 2 years, 1 year for them to see the actual implementation. And sometimes by the time they went live, that solution was redundant, like it was irrelevant. They couldn't even use it anymore. So they were wasting a lot of money that way. I guess that's the next point. Solutions became outdated before they delivered. So Scrum is lightweight, right? Because we're building in small increments. I mean, how much could you possibly build in 2 weeks, right? It's lightweight. Can be implemented where faster delivery is required. It's more suitable where you need to go live soon. Okay, the software development lifecycle is shorter as product is taken to market faster. So remember we talked about MVP, right? In Agile methodology, we want to build the minimum viable product. We get the minimum viable product to market faster, and then we perfect it. What we're delivering in the MVP is going to be decent. We're not going to deliver rubbish in the name of MVP. It will still be good, usable, stable, right? But it's not going to have every single thing, especially the requirements that are not an absolute must-have. Okay, the principles of Agile methodology. There's nothing you need to cram here in everything that I'm saying here. It's just for you to understand Agile methodology so that when you're working with this methodology, you understand why the interactions are the way they are. Okay, principles of Agile methodology. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, right? We care about interaction. We care about the people we're working with, the people we're talking to. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So there's some people who think, oh, you don't document in Agile. You absolutely document in Agile, but your document is built over time. Like we're delivering solutions and we're building our documentation. What we've done in 2 weeks, we build on it with another 2 weeks, we build on it with another 2 weeks. So at the end of the 6 months or the 1 year, we're still going to have our full documentation. Just that we didn't wait to document everything first before we started building. Okay? Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So you see collaboration again, right? Where it doesn't mean we don't use contracts in Agile methodology, but we want to talk. Let's talk about it. As we work towards getting this, agreeing on what the contract would state, right? Let's continue our collaboration. Okay? And then we have responding to changeover following a plan. In Agile, we still have plans, but if we need to pivot, we will pivot. We're not going to say, well, you agreed to that plan 3 days ago. You're not changing anything. If you want me to change anything, go get the signature of the president of the company. No, we don't do that. When Sprint 2, they're saying something about, oh, Sprint 1, unless there's going to be such a massive negative impact, right? We will respond to the change. That's why we're agile. Just like, when they say a human being is agile, right? They're light on their feet. They can get things done easily. They can switch and pivot if they need to do it. That's the idea behind agile methodology. So if you're reading a job description and they're like, following agile methodology, you understand what they're looking for. Obviously, they don't want, someone who's just going to be neck deep into documentation and not talking to anybody. That's not what they're looking for. Okay, so what is your role on a project or in a company that follows agile methodology? You're interacting with the client or business to understand their needs, also known as requirement gathering. You're going to document these requirements. A lot of companies who follow agile methodology would use user stories, or they could just write functional requirements. So I'll quickly remind you the difference between both. User story would write the requirement from the point of view of the user as this person, I need to be able to do that activity so that I can reap this reward or so that I can get this reward. Whereas a functional requirement would just say user needs to be, usually we won't say user, I would say like the role, right? Marketing manager needs to be able to create a lead. Okay, something like that. Both of them are still requirements. Both of them are still solid requirements, right? It's just the way that they've been documented. Okay. The BA confirms that the requirements are in line with the business rules. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second here. I showed you a few user stories in the past of login page, and if the user enters a wrong password 3 times consecutively within however many number of minutes I said it, the system should lock them out. That is a business rule. Somebody was saying that now I understand it better. These are business rules, and the user story is the requirement, and then some of the business rules was captured in the acceptance criteria. Business rules are very important. If not, we're going to build a free-for-all system that will fail. So as you're gathering the requirement, one of the ways that you're going to uncover the business rule is to say, is there a scenario where what you just told me will not occur? So they've told you something that happens and they've just said it freely, like it would always happen. Okay, well, are there exceptions to this rule? Are there exceptions where what you just told me will not occur? And what would lead to that exception? What would generate the exception? Oh, a user needs to be able to log in, right? And a user needs to be able to reset their password. And then you'd be like, okay, so if a user were to enter the wrong password, what should happen? They'd be like, well, that user should not be able to access the system. They would need to retry with the right password for them to be able to access the system. And then you'd be like, oh, so how many times can a user try? Because you've used systems before, right? And you know that if you go to the ATM and you enter the wrong password, however many wrong times, I don't even know what it is, it probably will lock you out, right? So you're going to ask that type of question, even though they did not offer that information up front. And that's how you begin to uncover the business rules. Okay, we're going to see more examples of business rules as we go through the course of this training, but please just remember, if you build a system that does not have the business rules applicable to the business, that business can actually fail. Like, it can actually fail because the business rules is what helps them maintain sanity in what they're doing. Imagine that people could enter the wrong password however many, or the wrong PIN number at the ATM however many number of times, 1 million times, and the system doesn't lock them out. Do you know how many cases of fraud we'll have? But the banks have a rule saying if you enter the wrong PIN number, X number of times will lock you out. Maybe it would even seize your card. And now you have to go into the bank and prove who you truly are before we get you your card. Business rules, very important. Requirements are very important, no doubt about it, but requirements without the proper business rules are terrible requirements, okay, because it'd be a free-for-all. Okay, the BA saves the requirements in the product backlog. Again, this could be a Word document stored on SharePoint. It could be Jira. It would be whatever your company uses. The BA would groom the product backlog. And just from the word groom, what does it mean to groom something? Clean it up. Okay, clean it up. Whatever needs to be deleted, if it needs to be rewarded, you've just got more clarity from the business, right? You can clean up the wording of the user story. in the product backlog. If you're making any changes to anything in the sprint backlog, everybody needs to be aware, because remember, the sprint backlog is active at any point in time. The story is in the sprint from the day that sprint begins. The sprint backlog is active. Nobody should be making any change. But let's say one of the developers came to ask you a question, the way you've written it, they're confused, and you've had a chat about it as a team, and now you want to reword it just so it's clear to anybody who's reading it. Your entire team needs to know, like people need to know, so that way, if they come back to they're like, oh, is this the same user story? You're not confusing people, basically. Okay, so the product backlog is where we do a lot of the grooming. Okay, and then the product owner would prioritize the backlog and hand it over to the BA for grooming. If you do not have a product owner, like I said in one of the previous classes, in all of the projects that I've worked on, there's only been one that had a product owner. So that it may be you prioritizing and grooming is all I'm trying to say here. And the BA will support the development team. So once they've pulled the requirements into the sprint backlog, that's not the end of your work in that sprint. Developers are going to come to you and say, oh, can you tell me a bit more? Even though when you have the sprint planning meeting, they all seem to have that understanding. But once they get into the thick of it, right, they may be a bit confused. They may need a bit more clarification. Or sometimes when they start breaking the user story apart and trying to build it, it actually happens that you didn't put enough information in there. There's scenarios that even you didn't think about or the business didn't think about. So they'll come to you and say, well, I understand this is a story and what your expectation is. However, what should happen in this scenario and what should happen in that scenario? And then you'll be like, oh, okay, interesting questions. Why don't I get back to you on it? You will then go to the business and tell them, thank you for meeting with me the other time. I captured your requirements. My team and I are working on it. But this other scenarios came up and we didn't quite know what you'd want to happen. Can you tell me what will happen in this scenario and that scenario? Okay, and that's how you're supporting the development team till they finish building those requirements. So let's look at waterfall. I'm just gonna quickly check. Okay, so we're gonna just look at waterfall. So I mentioned agile is not the only methodology there is when it comes to building. We have what we call waterfall. Okay, and with waterfall methodology, we're basically going to build an entire phase before we get into the next phase. One way waterfall plays out is we're going to gather all of our requirements before we start building. And that requirement gathering can take us half a year, but we are going to spend half a year talking to the business and then we'll take it away to build. Okay, at the end of a phase, a review is conducted to determine if the project is on the right path and whether to continue or discard the project. Okay, waterfall works better for smaller projects where we know enough to run with it and the entirety of it is not going to last too long. But for bigger projects like a 1 or 2 year project using waterfall, one of the issues they run into is what is in point 2, where they're building and at the end of 1 year, they're like, oh, let's look back and see how far we've come. And they'd be like, actually, yeah, we've gone far in the wrong direction. That's not to say waterfall is bad. Waterfall is appropriate where it is appropriate. But the good thing is that it is not your place as the BA to determine whether it's waterfall or agile. They know what they want in the company. And when they hire you, they will communicate it to you. And you're going to run with whatever they tell you. In waterfall, changing scope can actually kill the project because remember, maybe they now want to change scope in month 7. Well, what about everything we've done in months 1 to 6? The change they're asking for in month 7 may actually create so many bugs into the system that everything is just going to fail. Unlike Agile, where even if we wanted to make a change, like we're in month 7 and we realize we need to make a change, the change might be a change to something we did in month 6. Because remember, there's a constant loop of collaboration with the business. So if we needed to make a change, we're going to find out about it sooner rather than later, compared to waterfall where there is no constant loop of collaboration. So by the time you find out you need a change, and when you see what the change is going to, what impact the change will have on the project, sometimes it can actually kill the project. No working software is produced until late during the life cycle. I think I already covered that. And there's high amounts of risk and uncertainty. So let's look at this diagram here. We waterfall. So we do requirements, design, implementation, testing, verification, also testing, and then maintenance, right? You can see that the entire requirement portion, we're finishing it before we go to design, before we go to implementation. Whereas if this was agile, all the boxes we have here will happen, well, all of them apart from maintenance, right? Because we may not push the code to production, but requirement, design, implementation, testing, all of that will happen in one sprint, right? But it's going to be on a very small scale. Then sprint 2, we go in and we do all of this again. Okay, so I'm going to stop there just so that we're able to take some questions. We got through lesson 4, so next we're going to be starting lesson 5. Okay, so if you have any questions, please raise your hands, or if you have any comment, feel free to pop it in the chat. Vivian, were you going to talk? Say that you're not on mute.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Mobola, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Abiola, for the class. I have a quick question though. You said during a sprint that if the developers require more clarification from the BA, they could reach out. My question is, when they reach out to the BA to probably reward the user story, you said that all team members must be aware of that change. Does that mean it needs to like tag the product owner on that in wherever tool they are using, so that the product owner needs to reapprove that product backlog item?
Okay.
That's my first question.
Yeah, that's a good question. No, so not that way. You don't need to tag the product owner, but remember that on most projects, you have more than one developer working, and there could be more than one developer working on one user story. If that user story has multiple parts to it, right? Developers can divvy it up among themselves. If one developer comes to have a chat with you and you change it, what about any other developer that may be working on it? What about the QA that is already building their test case, waiting for the developers to pass the code to them? Do you understand? And that's why I said people in your team should be aware. One of the ways you'd figure out who I need to tell is who are because if let's say you're using Jira, for example, right? And you have multiple developers working on a user story, all of those developer names would be on the user story.
Correct.
Right. So you're going to know which developers, right? You may not know who the tester is, because until the developer pushes it to the tester's name won't be on it. And so when I say your team members need to know, I don't mean call a formal meeting, but have conversations with people, because remember, this is Agile, right? That's what we do all day, talking to people, having a chat. So when you've made a change to something, ideally, the editing of a requirement should happen before day 1 of the sprint. Ideally, that sprint planning meeting where we're having conversations about it, that's where we need to clean up the requirement. But let's say we missed it, or we did it to the best of our ability. However, when they started building, they still discovered the way you've documented it wasn't clear, or it wasn't complete and all of that. If you're making changes to it, number 1 priority, make sure everybody who's looking at that user story is notified of the change you're making, not just the person who came to have a one-on-one chat with you. Okay? And then maybe just informally touch base with the testers as well. Because if the testers build the test case based on what it was originally, but now you've come and you've expanded it, right? And they missed that part. For whatever reason, they missed that part. It's going to come back to you as the BA. A lot of times when, I encourage BAs, be very thorough, because nobody wants to be the one who looks like they didn't do their work completely. And because you are the originator of this requirement, right, it always comes back to you. So just for your own good, that's what I mean by let the team know if you're making any change. In the rare case that you're making a change to a requirement when a sprint has already started, just informally let them know. If you're working remotely, chat with the queue and say, I'm not sure if you already started building test cases for this, but I wanted to let you know that I made changes to it. Ideally, when the developer is done building and they push it to the BA should be looking at the updated version of when the developer is done building and they push it to the QA or the tester, that tester should be looking at the most up-to-date version of the requirement, right? Because you updated it and the update was live in Jira. However, if they started building that test case before, they may not pay 100% attention to the changes you've made to it. So that's why I would advise just have a chat with them. Anyway, I hope I answered your question, Mobola.
Yes, you did.
I
Please,
did.
my second question is on the software development lifecycle, the very first phase, I think planning, and I'm assuming that the requirement elicitation comes under that. Is
It
there a
does.
logical sequence to asking the right questions? I don't know, maybe you have a formula
Yeah, when
as
we get to
to,
requirement gathering lesson, we'll talk about it.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? We're quiet today. Are we still in weekend mode? Any
No, I'm
questions,
good. I
comments?
don't have questions.
Okay, go ahead, please.
No, I said I don't have any questions. I'm okay with everything.
Oh, you don't have any questions. Okay, good. I heard there's a total of, in the few minutes that I have, I'm just going to talk about the group work that we're going to do. So I think there's a total of 7 groups. We're going to give you more information. In fact, a document to explain to you what, what the task will be about. But what we're at a very high level, what we're looking for here is we've talked about writing a business case, right? And the reason why we do it. And we've talked about what your user story should look like. So at a high level in your group, what we're going to be doing is you're going to be writing a business case or a solution that for an implementation of your choosing, you'd, have a conversation with your group members and, decide on this is the name of our company, this is the solution we're going to be implementing, this is how much money we're going to be asking for, this is the return on investment and all of that. So a business case, not anything too elaborate, but if you can touch on what I touched on in class, right, which are many of the critical components of a business case, right? And then we will need to see your requirement document, your user stories. We want just about 3 to 5 user stories with clear acceptance criteria. Again, you're determining what the solution would be, what you want to sell, right? And then you need to show to us in the system, right? So fast forward, we've given you the money, you've done this implementation, you're going to show us in your org what you've built. So I know that's very high level, and we're going to get into the details of it. Your presentation is going to be not next week, the week after that. Each team, so we're going to do presentations over 2 days. Each team is going to have about 30 minutes, and we're going to be presenting in class this way to everybody what you've done. Okay, so again, I know that's very high level. I'll provide a documentation that will explain clearly what is required of you. And of course, if you have any questions, we'll take it from there. So hopefully by the end of this week, you have that document. Next week, you can ask me questions on any questions you have about what's required of you. And then the week after that is when you do your presentation. Okay. Awesome. So before we end the class today, I'll ask one more time any other questions or comments or clarification anyone needs about what I taught today or about your upcoming presentation. Awesome. Well, if there's none, I hope you have a good evening, a wonderful day, depending on where you are, and we will connect tomorrow.
Thank you. Have a good evening.